what is good for you and why? What makes it essential for me to play this music? I think there are a couple of essential characteristics of all music that I love. I was for many years a touring classical pianist, but I had started out in grade school realizing that girls weren't that impressed with fast octaves and the Liszt Hungarian Rhapsodies. They were more into the pop music. My sister turned me on to the Beatles, and I liked them, but it wasn't anything that really made me want to participate in the music.
Yeah.
And it was a terrible time to take as your springboard as a keyboardist in pop music, because who did I have? The Doors. I could play the organ solo to light my fire, and the end and all of that stuff, and was making up my own. And people wondered, well, why would you do something like that? Why don't you just play what's on the record? Anyway, so I was doing the Doors. We were doing Iron Butterfly. I knew Inagata Devita. Santana had a decent, keyboard essence to it. But yeah, so I started getting into pop music that way, and then started gravitating more to the art rock, Mahavishnu Orchestra, and then into jazz and Miles Davis, Chick Corea, Keith Jarrett, McCoy Tyner. And so all this time I was really just sticking to the classical studies, but I was sort of interested in this other thing. And at the time, I started out making this rock band, and then played jazz professionally in high school when my family moved to Pittsburgh, and it was on the basis of that I went to New England Conservatory of Music in Boston for training, because they had a really good classical and jazz department. Once I got there, I was going as a classical major, but I thought I might try to play both sides. And they have a very serious jazz department there at New England, and it was very clear that all of the players that I revered had forged their modern musical language out of a deep knowledge and participation in traditional jazz in all of its manifestations. When I was at New England Conservatory of Music, the president of the conservatory was Gunther Schuller, who
Hmm.
was really the one who taught me the Duke Ellington adage: there are only two kinds of music, good music and the other kind, and really has only to do with the evidence of the performer and the listener, which is what what is good for you and why. What makes it essential for me to play this music? And do I need to be exclusive in the kinds of music that I address? And likewise, do listeners feel more comfortable listening to what they know? Do they want to try something new? What criteria do they have to judge good and bad music? So, but the other thing that was quite clear was, as I say, all these players that I admired really knew the history of jazz and forged their playing out of it. I was just kind of dabbling on the modern end of their own playing. So I all of a sudden felt like I'd have to go back and reinvent the wheel as far as me and jazz is concerned. And I felt it was more invigorating and perhaps more challenging for me to revitalize the moments of the classical repertoire that I felt uh, I could do in a way that no other player could. So I went that way for a long time, and was touring, and then came to this radio program that I did for 20 years for National Public Radio here in U.S. Called From the Top, which was a showcase for pre-college classical musicians with whom I would collaborate on air and interview. And we would highlight their stories. And it would basically be a variety program with 5 different musical acts per show. And it was wonderful how all of the audience members would gravitate to a different personality, because we would be allowing them to present themselves as artists and as people. And that was quite trailblazing at the time because we were used to concerts as more rituals, and they weren't about the contact between performer and audience. And we kind of blazed the trail there, and now it's really an essential part of concert life, I believe. But in any case, we would we started out doing from the top, uh, wanting to make it a forum for all kinds of young performers, musical theater, uh, rap, uh, gospel, folk, anything. And when we were shopping the show around, it was like, oh, you play 1 minute of Jazz Mister and you are off. Because it was basically a classical constituency. The U.S. classical market was basically who we were pitching to, despite the fact that we have as much percentage of talk to playing that would have qualified us for any of the news markets, which became much more accessible and amenable in later days. In any case, I digress. But so we would have the halfway point of our hour-long weekly broadcast, and there would be a moment which would either be played by our participating stations or would be uh, broken away from to take care of local business, station identification or local announcements of some sort or another. And so we didn't want our young guests to be at the whim of our local stations, whether they would be heard or not. So that became the opportunity for me to play a solo every week.
Oh.
And so when I ran out of, two-part inventions and Chopin preludes, I I thought, well, why not uh, get get cracking on some of this music that I've been obsessed with since OK Computer came out, 1997. And I started doing these arrangements of Radiohead and Nick Drake and Elliott Smith. And actually, the first time that I played a Radiohead set for a real big audience was for the NPR program Performance Today, sort of a magazine format, which would occasionally do live performances at their studio in Washington, D.C. And I went on, and Fred Child, I believe, was the host. I was there playing Radiohead and Nick Drake and Rameau and Shostakovich, I believe. And that show was then in turn linked to 150 Radiohead and rock related websites around the world, literally around the world. Um, and it was, I think, maybe a day or two after that I got a phone call from Sony saying, is this something that you're interested in touring and recording? And yes, yes, and yes. And so we were off and running at that point.
That's crazy. And you know what? It's ironic though, because you mentioned the reason for kind of when you were younger switching to this type of music was because Liszt was not attracting the ladies or something like that. But back in the day, like weren't they famously throwing themselves at him and you know?
Were. It's so
Uh,
unfair. It's
yeah,
so
what happened? What happened throughout history?
unfair.